I don't usually come to events at which I feel overdressed, but anyway, today I did. I want to thank Dr. Greengard and his wife very much for this wonderful award and for the idea that you had. I think it's really terrific, and it will be extremely valuable in the future for women in science. And I want to thank especially the Rockefeller, because it's so honoring to be recognized by a university which is already, you know, a jewel in the crown of the United States science. So that was an extra special bonus about the whole thing. Thank you very much indeed. And I have other people to thank too, so I'll do that briefly, but mostly my husband, John Kapler, because all those discoveries were made by him and me, and were it not for some sort of prenatal accident with a Y chromosome, he probably could be here himself instead of me. So, of course, everything that I've done, I did scientifically, I did with him, and he was a tremendous help to me. And I have to thank my parents, actually, who raised our kids. So one of the things about women is you have to deal with the children issue. And my children, including this one here, were raised by my father and mother, who, knowing that I would be a hopeless mother, moved from England to look after them all this time. They were great. And all the other colleagues, and we live in a very collegial society for science, and all those people, those colleagues, have been very, very helpful throughout the years. And I also should mention, actually, National Jewish. Some of you probably don't know anything about this place. It's a small tertiary care lung hospital in Denver that was founded, you know, because it was supposed to be good for your lungs to go to high altitude, a contradiction I've never really figured out. I think Thomas Mann had something to do with it. Anyway, it's been there all this time, and it really was, it's a small place. It's voted every year the #1 lung hospital in the country for asthma, allergy, COPD, emphysema, what have you. It really is a great place, and they managed us very well by just sort of leaving us alone to do whatever we wanted, and I guess the interaction worked out well. So think about National Jewish in the future if you ever have anything really, really badly wrong with your lungs, which hopefully you won't. So I thought I'd tell you about two things tonight. I won't tell you about T cells and how they work and so on. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about how I came to be an immunologist in the first place, and then a little bit about how I feel about being a woman scientist. So how did I become an immunologist in the first place? Well, it turns out that I'd graduated in 1967 from the University of Cambridge, and I was looking around to do a PhD with somebody or another. And I had my grandfather's brother, who I'd never really met actually, had invented something, had discovered something very important about how antibodies work in the 1930s. I never met him because he was a communist, and my grandmother thought he was way beyond the pale and not acceptable at all. So he'd been banished from my branch of the family because of that. But anyway, he had the same surname as I did, Marrack. And everybody who's over the age of 90 who's an immunologist, and there are fewer and fewer of them, will know who he was, and that he was this rather short-tempered little man. Anyway, I was going to go off and do a PhD on something else at the University of Cambridge, but the person who became my thesis advisor, Alan Munro, decided that it would be, since he just decided he was going to start studying T cells, which had only been discovered about 6 years before by Bob Good and Jacques Miller, really, decided it would be really, I don't know, some kind of kick to his lab to have a relative of this man, John Marrack, working in his lab. So I went to some cocktail party or another at Cambridge, and this guy came lurching up to me with blue eyes. He was a very, very good-looking guy at the time, and said, why are you going to go do that? Why don't you come and work in my lab? And not being able to resist those blue eyes, I said, oh yes, sure. And so I worked with him for 3 or 4 years, and then went to do a postdoc in San Diego, and was then supposed to go back to Cambridge to take a job in 1971, back there in the fens, somewhere or another. But then another pair of blue eyes showed up and said, oh, why are you going back to Cambridge when you can come with me, John Kapler, to upstate New York? And you would have thought the choice between, you know, living in academic luxury in Cambridge at some college or another, weighted on hand and foot, or living in a place where it snows 10 feet every winter and the sun doesn't come out between November and April. Actually, in the end, it turned out to be a surprisingly easy decision to make. So I started to be an immunologist because of blue eyes, and I carried on being an immunologist for the same reason. And that actually brings me to the first point I want to make this evening, which is that I believe that all the important decisions we make in our life are actually made somewhere around here, which is the region of the stomach. I think the Greeks or the Romantics or whatever it is who said it was the heart that makes all these decisions missed it slightly by a few inches. It's actually this feeling here in your stomach. You make a decision and your guts will tell you immediately whether this is the right decision or not. So all decisions of this type, important decisions, are made on the basis of emotion. Then later on, because we're rational human beings, it's easy to rationalize. You can rationalize anything, going to Iraq or whatever, if you try hard enough. But the initial decision is made based on flat-out hormones, actually. I don't know if that would be true of all the scientific discoveries we've made, but actually a surprisingly large number of them are probably made on that same, for that same reason. So then, that's how I became an immunologist and why I stayed being an immunologist, for those reasons. So then something about being a woman in science. So actually, I don't really feel that I have really been the victim of very much discrimination. I think for one reason or another, perhaps because we live way out there in the sticks, way beyond the Hudson River, these issues come up less often. I have met a couple of professors in my time who turned out to be vaguely discriminatory. For example, at one stage I got an established investigatorship from the American Heart Association. This was when I was a really baby assistant professor. And the head of my department had to decide what my salary was going to be, and he named a salary that was actually less than the minimum that the American Heart Association was prepared to pay. So they had to have a sort of back and forth about, well, how low can it go and still be acceptable? Which they did. And I ended up with $15,000 a year or whatever it was that was the minimum. And then I think there was another professor, head of a department actually in Rochester, who said, oh, you should be behind the sink and barefoot and all that kind of thing. But really, I don't think these things bother me very much. And going on in life, I don't think I really have confronted very much discrimination, perhaps because I kept meeting people like you, Dr. Greengard, instead of Larry Summers, I guess. But I think actually there was one thing about me that made discrimination less easy, and I think it's evident too in our presenter today, Titia, because both you and I are actually not American-born. So one of the advantages about being a woman and not born in this country is that we didn't go through the high school cheerleading, whatever it is you poor American ladies had to go through. So we can pretend that we do not know the ground rules about being a woman. In fact, in my case, it was even a better advantage than that, because I came from England, and as you know, the English elected Maggie Thatcher 3 or 4 times in a row. So not only am I not American, but I come from England, and all Americans think that all English women behave like Maggie Thatcher. So that has given me leave in the last 30 years or so to do exactly that. So there is an element of being unencumbered about coming from a different society. I think Tom Wolfe wrote a book about the Mid-Atlantic man that some of you may have read, and the advantages about not belonging to either culture is that you can, adopt whichever bit of it suits you at any given time. And I'm sure that you ladies in the audience who are not American have used this to your advantage. You have an interesting accent, you have an interesting voice, you can pretend that the rules in Germany or whatever are completely different than they are in the States, and that it's perfectly all right for a woman to stand up and say obscenities about whatever's going on in the department at the time and expect to be listened to. So that's not very helpful advice for young American women. From time to time I have to go talk to young American women about, well, how can one be a successful scientist? And of course, well, they're stuck with their country of birth, and they're still here in this country of their birth, so how can they deal with this issue? So I always tell them, well, you should pretend that you're from another planet. Just pretend that you're green or something or another, that you came from Mars, and that you don't have to obey whatever kind of rules are being projected onto you. And if you believe strongly enough that you come from another planet, or that you don't have a sex at all, which I think is almost impossible actually, perhaps you can make your way through this morass of difficulties about being a woman more easily. And so the The point being that the solution starts with the woman. She can't help who she's going to bump into, but if she believes truly that she's not going to be discriminated against and that she can behave like a man if that's what she wants to do, or like Maggie Thatcher if that's a model that suits you better, then maybe she can go through this more straightforwardly without having to pay attention to the obstacles that come up, the size of the office or whatever, so much. So that's my advice about how to deal with that issue. And I'd like to finish by saying, well, thank you very much indeed for this terrific award. And I hope you'll have more women who believe that they're actually green and can go through life in that way. Thank you.
I have to present Helen to you with this. So I'm going to read this first. Well, I'm honoured to be able to read the citation, and then Helen is going to present it to Pippa. On this 10th day of November, the Rockefeller University honours you, Philippa Marrack, as the recipient of the 2005 Pearl Meister Greengard Prize, an international award recognising outstanding women in biomedical research. At a time when women encountered significant challenges in establishing scientific careers, you began your own career by leaving your native England for the United States to conduct research in the undeveloped field of T-cell biology. With insight and with determination, you achieved prominence through a series of key discoveries. Your pursuit of fundamental knowledge has enriched our understanding of infection and of immunity, shedding light on complex biological systems that are intimately connected with health and disease. You have helped to shape the modern field of cellular immunology through your research and created countless new opportunities for others through your extraordinary dedication to the biomedical community. In your continuing quest to decode the intricate language of biological immunity, you are building an intellectual foundation that will lead to the design of new vaccines, revolutionize the study of autoimmune conditions, and bring new promise to transplantation therapies. Today, in presenting you with the Pearl Meister Greengard Prize, we recognize and thank you for your enduring contributions to biomedical science, your boundless energy and generosity of spirit, and I'm going to add wit as well, and your distinguished leadership in the research enterprise. I'm now going to hand over to Helen, who's going to make a short
I love
statement.
your irreverence.
It's not irreverence, it's the truth.
It's my honor this evening to present Dr. Philippa Marrack the Pearl Meister Greengard Prize, an international award recognizing outstanding women in biomedical science. On behalf of the distinguished jury of the Pearl Meister Greengard Prize and all of us here today, we congratulate you on this award.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.